Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Right, let's get started. My name's Joe. I'll be your host today. I work in the marketing team for Unity. You should probably guess because I'm the only guy wearing a shirt when they can't leave the house. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you are in the world, for this multiplayer session on the real costs of hosting your game. This is part of the Unite Now sessions that we're running. Google those if you want to watch any of the others. This session is going to be run by Paul, the Director of Customer Success, and Larry, who is our Lead Solution Engineer. Both gentlemen are multiplayer and cloud experts, so if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A chat, and we'll hopefully get to those at the end. But for now, I'll hand over to Paul to get started.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe, and thank you to everybody that's joined us on this call today. We have a 45-minute session we're going to run here. The 30 minutes of that is going to be Larry and I presenting, and then we're hoping to have 10 or 15 minutes at the tail end to take your questions. There's a lot of content, so we're going to move at real pace. So we're going to try and keep it punchy and fast. So bear with us and keep up, and then please save your questions till the end. So what we're going to cover today, well, it's all about the real costs of hosting your game. So in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Larry, and he's going to talk about the tie-in between player experience and the hosting costs of your game. So actually how your technology choices influence the player experience, which therefore influences revenue. I'm going to pick things up and talk about game server type, the different choices you have to make when selecting the infrastructure for your game. Then Larry's going to pick things up again, and he's going to take you through the technicalities and the costs associated with operating systems, capacity planning for your game, and patching it, something is often overlooked. And then we're going to go to Q&A at the end. So that's the format. And let's just go on to the next slide. Just before we kick things off, just a tiny little bit about multiplay, so you know who we are and hopefully give you some confidence that we know what we're talking about. Multiplay has been around for 20 plus years, believe it or not. We're game server hosting specialists. We've actually been part of Unity now for 2.5 years, which is amazing for us. We're part of the Unity Cloud Services. We're cloud services within that world. We were counting up, and we reckon probably in one way, shape, or form, we've worked on 500 games over the years, which is a lot, which gives us great depths of experience and a lot of information we've been able to see about what works well, what doesn't work so well, and how things have changed over time. We currently cover about 31 global locations, and to be super clear, we are fully engine agnostic, so our services apply to whether you're using Unity or any other engine, be it proprietary or something else. And over on the right-hand side of that slide is just a few of our wonderful customers that we're very privileged and lucky to be working with over time. So next slide is just a focusing statement to get us moving. Profitability is not guaranteed. You all probably know this, I'm sure you do, but the games industry continues to grow at an incredible pace. We're seeing forecasts of the industry globally reaching near on 200 billion by 2022. That is a massive, massive market. There is no shortage for appetite for games, and particularly online games and multiplayer games, as you know. So this is a growing space and something that so many of us want to be in, and so many of you want to build games within, but it's not always easy. Profitability, yeah, you know, games are businesses these days. They always have been, but that's how you have to look at things, particularly with free to play and so on around. So your game has to turn a profit. Unprofitable businesses don't have a tendency to stick around too long. So whilst there's an enormous amount of focus on the game and the content and the playability and its uniqueness, which is incredibly important, in parallel with that, you've got to think about monetization, obviously, where your revenue is going to come from and how you maximize that. But importantly, like any good business, you need to be looking at your running costs once this thing is up and live. And your hosting cost is a massive part of that. In our experience, the studios that get this right, they're the ones that make super smart choices early on in their journey. Their operations are very, very streamlined, and they maintain a laser focus on the costs of running their business in parallel with how to maximize the monetization as well. So this talk is specifically about hosting online multiplayer games. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Larry, who's going to talk about the technology choices you make and how they are directly linked to player engagement, which of course has a direct link to revenue. So over to you, Larry.
Thanks, Paul. Let me dig into player experience for our lovely audience. We wanted to start with player experience for a couple of reasons. We feel exceptionally passionate about player experience, not only because most of us in the team here are gamers, but because it's critically important in making your game successful. I'm an avid gamer myself, and I'm a fickle beast. If I've just bought a game, I want to be really sure that I can actually play it. I don't want long queue times. I definitely don't want latency to get in the way of my sort of phenomenal skills. And these factors are present on day one. I'm definitely reaching for the refund button really quickly. So player experience is at the core of any title. There are a number of decisions that need to be made that will impact player experience, but just with all game dev, finding the balance between the financial impact and an awesome player experience is an art form. It's not often considered, but player experience has an impact on the cost of hosting multiplayer titles. Game server performance, simulation tick rate, data center uptime, locations and resilience, regional splits. I mean, the list goes on, but each one of these factors and more come at a cost. Too many locations will fragment your player base, meaning you will have players queuing for matches. Too fewer locations, and then latency becomes a factor. If your tick rate is very high, this is going to give a tremendous player experience, but you generally reduce the player density per server you can achieve, which in turn increases costs as well. Then we have downtime. For every minute a player can't play your game, they are setting their sights on a new game. Gamers, I said I'm fickle, quite a lot of other gamers are fickle as well. We're always looking for the new shiny, and this impacts your ability to monetize your title. Even if it's just downtime to patch your server build, your game's reputation, and depending on the severity of any downtime that you may experience, could also impact your studio's reputation as well. This is why resilience and uptime are of paramount importance. Keeping players playing, that's what we all want. The investment in bringing your creative visions to life should never be impacted by server performance. Player experience is the culmination of expectation. That's my attempt at marketing, Joe. I apologize now. But players board the hype train when your marketing team is fueling that train. And these players, they want a wild ride, something that they can experience again and again. And in this situation, you've done the hardest of tasks and you've created an awesome game and you've marketed it well. But now you have to deal with a whole bunch of new unknowns. And these challenges come in many forms. If your capacity planning isn't perfect, you can run out of servers unless you can scale globally with player demand. If your regional splits are wrong, you have too many servers in a region that you don't need, you're wasting profits and engineering time monitoring and maintaining those servers. If you've chosen a single provider, maybe they don't have all the regions where your players want to play, or players start coming from regions that you didn't expect, and ramping up the cost of bandwidth across regions at the same time. Those players are now also getting a suboptimal player experience. Latency becomes your new enemy, not to mention that it's also impacting your review scores. Now, you have a solution which overcomes all of these points, but is it resilient enough? Does it perform in every way that you need it to? And how much effort is required from your internal teams to maintain it? There are a few things you can focus on to drive down the cost of hosting and improve player experience at the same time. Optimizing your game server binary is a pretty obvious one. I'm not trying to teach the developers here to suck eggs by any means, but I do feel it's very important to call out these points. And to some degree, all of these points are actually connected. If you are limiting what regions your title is available in, this isn't going to stop gamers playing your game from regions that you didn't expect or account for. To quote Dr. Ian Malcolm from one of my favorite movies, life finds a way, and so do players. They will play your game regardless of any limitations that you put in front of them. They will find a way. This means bandwidth per player, or the overall session bandwidth, should be kept to a minimum. This is one of those not so hidden costs, especially when you receive your first month's hosting bill. And generally, in my experience, bandwidth can be about 45% of the cost of running a multiplayer title. And that's when developers get it right. I've seen some real horror stories when it comes to bandwidth when people don't. This also links into matchmaking, region availability, and player density as well. Depending on what regions are available can lengthen queue times. In turn, latency is increased when you have players coming from those other regions you didn't account for. And now you tie that back to your matchmaking logic as well. If your game doesn't, or your game design doesn't support backfill into existing sessions, or I know some titles don't have that flexibility, it will also impact player density, meaning that you have low population sessions on a single piece of hardware. All of these areas can be optimized to make your title more robust, reduce your costs, and ultimately deliver the premium player experience that, let's be honest, players have come to expect and demand. One of the aims of this webinar was to quantify each of the topics we presented to you with a financial implication. The trouble is that player experience is such a wide-ranging topic. It covers so many factors that if I was to just go, this is one of the great unknowns, it wouldn't really resonate. But I can't quantify any one of the subtopics. Even if I could, it still wouldn't give this single bold figure that we're looking for. So what I can say is that player experience is a fundamental success criteria. And talking from personal experience, as I mentioned at the beginning, if my player experience is poor, I'm hitting refund really quickly. That game has not just lost my upfront purchase, but it's also lost any potential chances to monetize my experience as well. Over to you now, Paul, to briefly talk on server types.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Larry. Okay, right. I'm going to talk through the three fundamental choices and paths you can pursue when you're thinking about infrastructure for online games. So let's start with those. Top level, and I'm going to go into pros and cons of each of these on the following slides. So first of all, you've got your bare metal, and anybody who's been procuring infrastructure for any period of time knows exactly what this is. This is the traditional way of buying managed servers from hosting companies. You procure them for typically a term of a month, often a year, sometimes 3 years with negotiated rates. And, you know, bare metal is great because it's a physical thing. You can go and touch it, and I'll come on to the pros and cons of that in a second. Then we've got public cloud. This is your virtualized environment. You'll all be familiar with AWS and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of public cloud in the mix as well. So you could go down the bare metal route, you could go down the public cloud route, or you could choose option 3, which you may be less familiar with, was what happens when you blend all this stuff together in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud approach. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of those now. So first of all, let's talk about bare metal. So as I say, bare metal is actually highly cost effective when you look at it on a server by server basis. When compared to cloud, and particularly, I'm not suggesting bare metal is always cheaper than cloud. It all depends on the application of what you're using the cloud for and how you manage your cloud instances. So in the case of gaming, it often very much is. And the reason for that is because it is less flexible than cloud. Okay, it's highly cost effective, but that's because it's a little less flexible. You tend to get bandwidth bundled in as well with the cost of your server, which is phenomenal. It's good. The other pros of bare metal is that it's highly reliable. I mean, let's face it, what sits behind the cloud is, you guessed it, bare metal. So it's the same thing behind the scenes, and it's super highly performant. In the sense that there's no hypervisor to deal with as well. So you can really get every last ounce of energy out of that CPU with bare metal. So it's cheap, it's reliable and performant. What's not so good about it is it's a little less flexible. You have longer contracts, much trickier to scale up and down. Often no automation is in place with many of the bare metal providers. So you have to place an order, perhaps wait for hours or maybe a day for the server to be racked or put online. It can be a bit of a procurement headache if you go down this route. If you plan to do a global launch and you want to reach every corner of the globe, then you're probably not going to find one single provider that meets all your needs. And you've got to keep a close eye on your costs with bare metal as well, as if mismanaged, then you can get bandwidth overages or prices can vary over time. So that's the world of bare metal. It has its place. Let's go on to cloud. So cloud, as I said, these are virtualized environments. You'll be familiar with it. The beautiful thing about cloud is its flexibility. Absolutely everything is automatable via APIs or dashboards or however you want to approach it. Super scalable as well. I've put down the bottom there, infinite in quotes. Of course, we all know that the big secret is it's not really infinite, but it gives that impression. And actually, it's rare that you'll run out of capacity until you get into really, really big gaming challenges. And it's highly performant as well. Some challenges with certain engines in the early days, but a lot of that's been ironed out now. And so cloud has a really good place. But this flexibility comes at a cost, and these are the cons. You've got to watch out for bandwidth. in games, you've got to watch out with bandwidth. Just building what Larry was saying earlier on, that is the hidden tax of cloud that will catch you out, and it can be 45-50% of your bill. The other con is billing can tend to be a little bit complicated. You need a bit of a degree to figure out the invoice when you get it from some of these cloud providers. And then scaling, if you're drawn to cloud because you think I can automate it and I can scale it, this should be easy. Actually, there's more to it than meets the eye. Scaling up, not so challenging. Scaling down, a lot harder. You can't scale down a cloud server until you're 100% confident there's no players on that VM, and therefore you need some pretty smart orchestration in the background to scale down in a really streamlined, effective way. And then thirdly, going on to the multi-cloud approach, well, this is something that Multiplay, we pioneered this in many ways. This is when you take the best of all those worlds. So you take the cost effectiveness and performance of bare metal, and you knit this together with the flexibility and resilience and scale of cloud. So it's all those things there in the cons column. You know, it's cost effective, it's scalable, you can automate the majority of it, and you get the benefits of all of it knitted together. The other thing with the multi-cloud approach as well is it's resilient. So if you don't go with just one cloud, but you've got Google Cloud in there, you might have AWS and Azure as well, then even if one of those cloud companies has an issue, you can, with the right orchestration, switch across pretty easily. The con, if there was a con of this approach, is you can't do this stuff out of the box. So you're going to need some kind of technology, some kind of orchestration layer that's going to take care of all the knitting together of these technologies. You can try and do this yourself, and we've seen customers try that with some with greater success than others. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not easy to do, and this is the kind of thing you'd probably want to go to a specialist to try and achieve. And then really onto the next slide, which is, so what about these cost savings? Well, again, it's difficult to put a number on it because there's so many things that is, so many factors in play here. But what I can tell you is we have undoubtedly seen up to 50% or more savings using a multi-cloud hybrid approach versus going all in on cloud or all in on bare metal. And if that seems weird, well, hang on a minute, bare metal is cheaper. So why is blending bare metal with cloud even cheaper? It doesn't make sense. Actually, it does make sense when you stop and think about it, because bare metal, if you spin up even exactly the right of bare metal you need to meet the peak of any given day in any given region, then that's great. By the way, you would have a crystal ball and you'd be something of a magician if you were able to do that. But even if you could, you're actually going to get a lot of bare metal sat there redundant and unused, and you're paying for it during the low parts of the day when everybody's asleep and not playing games. So actually that's when cloud does come in with the blend of bare metal, because the math says and the algorithms have proven out that actually you can get it a lot cheaper if you use a blend of the two. So that's really it for game server types. Let me hand back to Larry, and I think he's going to talk about the interesting side of operating systems and their implications to cost.
Thanks for those insights there, Paul. Let's delve straight into OS choices and how they affect the overall cost of hosting a multiplayer title. This topic is pretty simple, thankfully, because some of the other topics we have are a bit dense, but actually this one is killer in my opinion. Windows Server, or running Windows Server as your OS, is costing you money. Money that you could be using elsewhere. Windows historically has been an easy choice during development. Most games at release certainly run on Windows outside of the console realm, and most dedicated game servers start life as a headless build of a Windows game client. They've removed all of the rendering and they're just using it to play the simulation. This method works, and it's really great for rapid prototyping. It gives you a single code base between client and server, and ultimately getting you something built faster is a very good thing before a project receives the green light to enter active development. But, and it's a pretty big but, Windows servers are very expensive to operate, and there is an alternative, and a lot of people will have guessed already, it's Linux. This requires a different set of skills internally, and we are starting to see a shift towards this more widely now, but this single choice has a massive impact on your server costs. Let's break down the information we have on the next slide here. Bare metal isn't too scary. It's manageable from a Windows licensing perspective. It costs between $25 and $35 per machine. per month generally, and that's pretty simple, thankfully. If you require 50 servers on an average, that would be about $1,500 on Windows licensing alone to support those pieces of hardware. For cloud, it's a slightly different, more scary story, for sure. And the way Windows licensing is calculated in the cloud is by core. And we have to remember, in the world of cloud, we're dealing with logical cores, which are the threads essentially of a hyper-threaded core. So in order to license an 8 vCPU cloud instance or 4 physical cores, we would have to multiply the licensing cost per core by the base cost per hour. I'm using a leading cloud provider's pricing in my example, which is due to go up by 15% come June. And it's an important call out. This isn't a cost that's controlled by the cloud providers. It's coming from Microsoft. They are charging for the product what they think it's worth. So if you're running a pure cloud deployment with servers running for a full calendar month, that's currently $233.60 a month per instance. To use the same example as bare metal, for 50 servers running in that manner, it would cost you $11,680 in Windows licensing for the comparable workloads running in cloud. Then if we factor in that price change that's coming in June as well, we're now moving up to $268.41 per cloud instance in this example, which is $13,420 in Windows licensing. Or if we put it in a slightly different way, the uplift in cost coming in June is almost the same cost as licensing 50 bare metal servers for 1 month. It's $1,740 and change. So this is based on the assumption that you don't have an orchestration system to bring those cloud instances offline when you no longer need them. But cost isn't the only factor to consider when it comes to Linux. From our experience, Linux generally runs game servers more optimally. There are exceptions because every game is unique. There's no equation to solve for here because each game needs to be evaluated individually to truly understand what will work best. This can come down to game engine choice, the genre of game that you're building, and a whole slew of other factors that we don't have time to delve into too deeply today. But typically, using Linux means you can fit more game server instances per machine. And these numbers will be different again between bare metal and cloud because of the CPU clock speeds between bare metal and cloud. Another factor that you have to consider when you're capacity planning, because if you now need 60 servers instead of 50 because you're using pure cloud, that further impacts the cost of OS licensing and the engineering time required to maintain those pieces of hardware as well. With more game servers per instance per machine, more game server instances per machine, this means more players per machine as well. This is what I would call the player density concept that I mentioned when we were talking about player experience. Player density is a very real driver behind cost savings. To give you a very real world example here, we supported Tripwire Interactive with their migration from Windows to Linux for Killing Floor 2. After making the switch, they saw a reduction in cost by 14%. When you consider that on a global server deployment, 14% is far from insignificant. And I mentioned at the top of this topic that it's pretty simple, but there are certainly some nuances to this choice. Do you have the in-house expertise to build a Linux dedicated server? Does your IT or live ops team have the experience to manage those Linux servers once they're online? Do you have the time to make this change before launch or the funding to do it post-launch if this is something you hadn't factored in previously? This ultimately boils down to, do you want to pay for Windows servers licensing for the entire life cycle of your game? I know that building a Linux dedicated server also comes at a cost, but when you factor in that upfront investment, building a Linux dedicated server from the start, you will then be free from the cost of OS licensing for the life cycle of your game. This is obviously another balancing act. You've got to look at your in-house skills, the time and the effort in order to execute against a dedicated Linux server. But when you balance that against the monthly cost of Windows Server licensing, which would you prefer to budget for? I know which direction I would take. Moving swiftly on for our lovely attendees, we have capacity planning, something I've alluded to a couple of times during this webinar, but it very much deserves its own section. I really wanted to highlight a quick point that we're in the process of eradicating this challenge for our customers. Watch this space for more information. We're going to be talking about this a lot soon. So Capacity planning is a very interesting beast, and just to caveat, the focus of what I'm going to talk about on this topic is pre-launch. Essentially, you're trying to predict success, and very few of us in this industry are predicting failure, although that's an interesting paradigm in its own right. This means that you're rolling the dice on just how many players are going to turn up at launch. Basically, you need that crystal ball that Paul was referring to earlier. And if anyone out there has this crystal ball, I'd love to take a look myself, and I'm sure lots of other people would do on the webinar as well. But this is because marketing data, which is normally the data that we're using to help us do this capacity planning, isn't a true indication of success. It is exceptionally useful, but you are now gambling on the success of your title when it comes to capacity planning. We're back in the territory of the unknown unknowns. How many people will turn up globally on day one to play your game? It's a question that I've posed in many of the other talks that I've done, and actually it's one that we still can't answer because we don't have this crystal ball, but we can mitigate it. We can ask questions about latency tolerance, what regions you're going to launch in, what the cost per player is you're targeting. But when it comes down to the wire, capacity planning is your confidence in your title to be the next big thing, which, and I'll be totally honest here, from my experiences, every studio we speak to thinks they have the next big thing. And that's not a bad thing. As the old adage goes, pride cometh before a fall, and a wrong move at the capacity planning stage is exceptionally costly. If there's one thing that I'm always talking about with prospective clients, it is these unknowns. As we all know, the nature of an unknown is that it's unquantifiable. We traditionally have posed these questions around how much capacity do you need globally? Every time I ask that question, I feel sorry for the people who are asking it of, because this is an exceptionally difficult and unknowable question to answer, but still we go deeper. We start trying to identify what the regional splits are. We are then going to look at where are you going to have players on that world stage? And I'm not going Shakespeare on you here, but it really is something that we have to know, especially when we're trying to be cost effective when it comes to server hosting. Then we start to look at this marketing data that we've got as well. We're trying to mitigate the risks to player experience while taking a very real look at the cost management of launching one of these sort of titles. And then we might ask as well, what traction have you seen from your marketing team? These lists of questions just pile up. We're asking studios something that they aren't able to answer accurately, but as I mentioned at the beginning, unknowns are unquantifiable. So changing this equation is exceptionally important to us, and we've made steps to manage those unknowns. We continue, and we have to continue to be flexible as possible, bringing bare metal online as quickly as we can to balance the cost of cloud. This is the best challenge any game can have. It's like, if your game's successful, it's the best thing in the world, but you still have to overcome these unknowns when these things do happen. And this challenge isn't limited to new IPs. It's not limited to the indies out there trying to define the next genre breaking game. This is something that is in the bedrock of all multiplayer titles. Ultimately, even the biggest IPs in the world that launch every year don't know exactly how much capacity to procure ahead of time. Hybrid hosting is the first step to mitigating this, bringing capacity online when and where you need it, only when you need it, scaling with player demand. It's one of those things that it's the half solve. We're trying to find the next puzzle piece to solve this on a wider world, as it were, from a studio perspective. Now, massive numbers everywhere. I know this slide has got a lot of information on it, but just hear me out for a moment. I've taken publicly available average server costs on a per regional basis from a leading bare metal provider. This is just the machine cost, not factoring in bandwidth or licensing for a 4-core physical server with a 1 terabyte hard drive and 32 gigs of RAM. When you're capacity planning, you have to look at it in the lens of expectation versus reality. What I'm doing here is a very basic capacity plan. I'm rounding up to whole machines because you can't purchase a third of a machine, especially for these type of workloads. And in the expectation we have here is we're expecting 2 million CCU globally at launch, with a regional split of 50% in America, 40% in Europe, 10% in Asia. This brings our server cost based on our plan to just over $350,000 per month. The trouble with the expectation is it often doesn't follow up in reality. And now in this situation at launch, we only got 1 million players globally, but we'd already provisioned all of this hardware. And actually we got our regional splits wrong as well. So we had 60% in America, 20% in Europe, and 20% in Asia. This means for month one, you're not using all of the capacity you planned for, and actually we're massively over provisioned in Europe. A miscalculation between the expectation and reality in the previous example led us to being over provisioned to the cost of $166,000, for 1 million players that we didn't need capacity for. That's not a small number. And actually, the reverse is true if you under provision, because if you look at your game as a stadium, you have the stadium doors open, but you haven't bought enough seats in order for your players to take part in the game, which ultimately means you're missing out on potential revenue as well. Sorry, you've got me for another section, but patching is one of those inevitable and necessary evils. Balancing changes, countering exploits, or correcting an element in your simulation that just doesn't work as intended. Patching a live environment takes skill and precision. And when executed poorly, it really can impact your profitability. It has to be said, nobody likes downtime, planned or unplanned. Both situations influence your ability to be profitable. When we look at downtime through the lens of server patching, there are quite a few angles you can approach it from. You have scheduled downtime, regional phased rollouts, dual fleet capacity, live patching. There's a couple of others there as well. And we are only hosting in this, or highlighting, sorry, in this particular slide, 2 of those models. And that is certainly the most common version of patching we see in the industry, which is the scheduled downtime, these maintenance windows where games will be unavailable for your players to play. Scheduled maintenance is costing you money as well, just like Windows licensing. Not only do you have to look at the live ops effort involved to complete this operation smoothly, but you also have to consider that for every minute you're offline, players are looking over their shoulder, like I mentioned before, for another title to play while their favorite game is unavailable. Yes, those players will be back, but offline time will have a direct and tangible impact on your ability to monetize. Depending on the solution to this problem, you may be spinning up an entire new fleet of capacity to attempt to avoid downtime. You may just be turning off access to the game until you're done, which is certainly one approach, and it's tried and tested and it works. But then when we look at live patching, all of those issues that I've just been discussing kind of melt away. You can flip a live game server version without player experience impact in the same capacity, and you are perceivably never offline. Now, I'm not saying that live patching is an approach that will work for every game. However, it can still be leveraged to make any scheduled maintenance task more effective and more efficient. You can slim down the amount of time that you need to be offline. The key takeaway for live patching is that it minimizes player disruption, which is a better experience for your players, and it means they spend longer playing your game. In the example I have here, on the left-hand side, we have multiple game server types, as in different binaries to operate this title, running on the left-hand side. And as we move towards the right of the graph, we see the downturn of each of these game server types highlighted here by the dashed box. As we move through the highlighted window, you can see that the current version drains out and it is replaced by the new version at the same velocity. This is transparent to players unless you need a client-side patch. If there's no need to patch your client side, then players just drop into their next match without ever experiencing any downtime. And that's really important for that player experience we were talking about earlier. This is just a bit of anecdotal stuff as well. What I've highlighted here is another title that has entered their scheduled maintenance, and the resulting player bump we see here is driven by that title being unavailable. Over the years I've been playing games, and so it's a long time now, I've been burnt personally by the wrong time zone, or being in the wrong time zone. Just as peak time comes around in my region, it's the perfect maintenance window for another time zone because of all of their players are in bed. With live patching, or as we call it, zero downtime patching, players wouldn't be looking for something else to play during maintenance. Happy gamers are the ones that can basically play your game whenever they choose to, and if you don't allow that to happen, you are limiting your ability to be profitable by making your game unavailable during peak times. Another one of these big, lovely numbers. But in 2018, Fortnite broke the record for most revenue of any video game in history. That's $2.4 billion. Breaking that down, that's $200 million a month, or $274,000 an hour. Now, these are average numbers across a year, of course, but based on these numbers, if Fortnite were to have a maintenance window of 4 hours, it would cost them $1.1 million in lost revenue, not to mention a lot of grumpy Fortnite fans. In addition to an in-game purchases that they're basically not able to go and buy, you also have other things to consider, like the extra headcount to manage and maintain the hardware used. And then many other factors that are not considered in this number as well. That's enough from me. I'm going to pass back to Paul now to cover a little bit of a bonus topic we have for you.
Thanks, Larry. I'll keep this one short and sweet. Just a little bonus topic. I couldn't go through this webinar without talking about the people aspect of all this. So I'm going to end with a bit of a message of solidarity. And I'm talking to the back-end engineers who undoubtedly, some of which will be on this call, I'm sure. We salute you. We know the pain you go through. We know many of you. And these are the people that often they wear many, many, many hats. Sometimes they're writing netcode, transport layers. Sometimes they're the procurement person. Sometimes they're the person trying to figure out the public cloud, trying to price up the bare metal. Sometimes they're the person who's responsible for scale testing, matchmaker testing, all this stuff, infrastructure, which is a fun job. It's an interesting job. But when you go live and your game is super successful, which we hope it is, then prepare yourself to be thrust into the limelight, because you're about to become the most important person in your studio. And that's a scary place to be. And I hope you don't need any sleep, because these people don't get any sleep. And it's a tough period to go through. So what we're talking about here is think about, as you plan your game launch and you plan your strategy for your business, who do you want to be your infrastructure team? Who is the operational team that's going to run your game once it's live, up, running, and successful? And it can't be just one person that you continually page night in, night out and get them out of bed. That just doesn't work. And even if that one person exists inside your studio, which they probably do, their preference is they're going to come to you and say, either A, I need a team and I need this team quick, or they're going to go to an outsourced partner, someone like us, who will become their partner and to look after all this stuff for them. So it's a super, super important point that you've got to look after your people, and the infrastructure people and the back-end engineers are pivotal to your success once this game goes live. So make sure you're preparing for that. To go on to the next slide, just to talk about live operations. And by the way, here's a number which is massively lowballed. As an absolute minimum, if you want to have a true 24/7 round the clock 365-day team if you want to do follow the sun and round the world, you're going to need at least 12 people, and that is probably lowballing just their salaries, regardless of recruitment costs, management costs, overheads of employment, offices, and everything else that comes with it. It's probably double or triple that. So, and that's in addition to your hosting costs and all the rest of it. So someone needs to look after the baby, your beautiful game that you've, born and everybody's playing it. Someone's got to keep this thing going. So give that some thought about how you're going to approach that. You're not trying to build a game that's not successful. You're trying to build a game that's super successful. So if you're serious about how successful your game's going to be, then you need to get serious about the team that's going to operate it once it's live. All right. That pretty much takes us to the end. Joe,
Yeah.
are we going into Q&A?
Yeah. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Larry, for those insights. I hope you all found that useful. A quick rundown of the key cost variables for hosting. As I said, I'm sure you'll have questions, and if you want to reach out to us offline, then do. I'll share the contact details in a second. We did have a few questions. Let me just have a little look at the chat. There was one from the key question a few people have asked in the chat is around the slides and stuff. You'll get a recording of this sent to you via email, and it'll be live on the Unite Now website as well. All the sessions, as I said, are on there. And I think it might be on the Unity YouTube channel as well. So look out for it there. There's a few questions. There was one interesting one from Hunter. Does APAC hosting usually cost more? This has been my experience. Curious if that's a thing.
definitely is a thing. It's normally down to the bandwidth cost in those regions. So hardware is generally a little bit more expensive, but then when you start looking at the bandwidth required to actually use those services in those regions, they definitely come in more expensive there as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Paul.
Yeah, just to build on that, Larry's absolutely right. And it's a good observation, Hunter. It is more expensive in that part of the world. And to go to the next step with this story, China, which is a presentation in itself, by the way, brings with its own challenges. But bandwidth is even more of a prevalent challenge in China because even bare metal has independent bandwidth costs rather than bundling it with the server. So that's the kind of thing you've got to keep a close eye out for.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. One of the questions was around the live ops costs that you're just talking about, Paul. I believe, was that for a month or a year? I think that was for a year, wasn't it?
Yeah, but don't read into the number too much. I mean, this is just salaries, and it depends on your approach. You could look at outsourced options. You could look at different ways of doing it, outsourcing it to lower cost parts of the world and all the rest of it. There's probably many different ways to approach this. All you really need to think about is get your pen and paper out and start thinking about how you're going to approach in a very human way the cost of looking after your game. And you can't do it Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. It has to be 7 days a week, 365 is the only way you can do it. So start thinking about your strategy around that. Obviously, there's service providers out there that specialize in this. I wouldn't recommend you do it yourself, but again, that's a talk. That's a separate talk probably, but it just gives you an indication of it's a cost you can't ignore. And right now, you've probably got one back-end engineer and their fixed salary, and actually that cost is going to grow if you have a successful game on your hands.
Cool. Thank you. And just one last one before we wrap up. The 14% saving you mentioned, Larry, from moving to Windows to Linux, was that just on license costs, or was that more from a more optimized servers as well?
It's a combination of both. So as I mentioned, like when you can tightly pack more instances on a Linux machine, you are trading off not only having less servers, because if you don't need as many servers to support the same player base, but you also then having not to pay for Windows licensing as well. So it's a combined cost, or cost saving, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So just to wrap up, as I said, I'll put the details there. I think someone did ask if they can reach out to us. So there are the details in terms of reaching out to us via the contact form on our website, or the social channels. As I said, you'll be getting an email with the live links as well. So please do reach out if you have any other questions. And thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep. Thanks for dialing in.